This is a UFO, and so is this, and so is this. A UFO is simply an object in the air or the water that cannot be instantly identified. It could be anything from a blip on a radar screen to a full-blown flying saucer. We've been experiencing these phenomena all throughout history and all over the world. So what are they? Well, I've spent countless hours compiling the most intriguing and interesting cases of UFO sightings and encounters that I am convinced will make you believe there truly are unexplainable objects in our skies and oceans. I've ranked them all in a tier list, from S being the most believable and F being the least. The last set of encounters are insane, and if you weren't a believer before hearing these, I think you will be now. Because have you ever yourself seen anything you can't explain? Maybe a light that shouldn't be there, or a shadow that just looks off? Maybe it's an uneasy feeling while walking through the forest or out late at night. Well, that's what happened to Kenneth Arnold on June 24th, 1947. Arnold took off from Chehalis, Washington en route to an air show in Pendleton, Oregon. An experienced pilot with 4,000 flight hours and a member of an Idaho search and rescue unit, he planned a detour to search for a downed U.S. Marine Corps commando transport and potentially claim a $5,000 reward. But what he actually found instead would change the course of his life and the world as a whole. Around 3 p.m. near Mount Rainier, Arnold saw a bright flash and assumed it was just a reflection from another aircraft. He soon spotted 9 shiny objects flying in formation, which he described as circular, about 100 feet across, and tailless, moving erratically. He called them flying saucers. Timing their flight, Arnold estimated their speed at 1,200 miles per hour or more, far exceeding any known aircraft speed at the time. Although Arnold denied initially describing the objects as flying saucers, the media quickly adopted the term after he spoke with reporters from the East Oregonian. A brief article led to nationwide coverage dubbing the objects flying saucers officially. The story made Arnold a reluctant media sensation, though he later expressed frustration over misquotes and misinformation. Kenneth, although reluctant, was the father of the term flying saucer. So what did Arnold really see? Was it a UFO? Was it an alien encounter? Arnold was a knowledgeable, well-informed witness. He sadly was the only witness, which does make his observations less believable. That being said, his character and his intricacy of his description of the object doesn't rule out that they existed. There have been attempts at other explanations, including reflections and clouds that resembled a saucer, but in my opinion, I don't think he was lying or was misinformed. Kenneth was an experienced airman and an excellent character witness, and I'm putting these encounters in a C tier. It can go either way on what Arnold really saw. Kenneth may have been the first to coin the term flying saucer, but he wasn't the first to witness these types of unexplainable objects in the air. Toward the end of World War II, mission updates from the 415th Night Fighter Squadron took a mysterious turn. Alongside dogfights over the German-occupied Rhine Valley, pilots began reporting eerie lights following their aircraft. In November 1944, a Bristol Beaufighter crew, pilots Edward Schleuder, radar observer Donald J. Myers, and intelligence officer Fred Ringwald encountered these objects firsthand. Schleuder saw 8 to 10 bright orange lights off the left wing through the air at high speed. Neither radar observer Myers or intelligence officer Ringwald on the ground detected anything. Schleuder turned towards the lights and they disappeared, the report stated. Later they appeared further away, continuing for several minutes before vanishing. Myers dubbed these phenomena Foo Fighters, after a nonsense word from a Smokey Stover cartoon, and not to be confused with the Dave Grohl band from the 1990s. Reports persisted throughout the remainder of the war. The objects, red, orange, or green, flew at 200 miles per hour, singly or in formations of up to 10, often outmaneuvering the planes themselves. They never appeared on radar. The 415's professional pilots were unnerved. Scared shitless was how one pilot described it. So what was spooking these highly trained, highly skilled pilots? On New Year's Eve 1944, Associated Press correspondent Robert C. Wilson documented their encounters, bringing national attention. Explanations ranged from hallucinations to German secret weapons, but none convinced these airmen. Army Air Command investigations disappeared post-war, but in 1953, the CIA reopened the investigation and officially offered no official conclusion. The fact that there was never been an explanation and both sides post-war came out and said that they were neither of their weapons leaves me baffled. These were highly skilled, highly trained airmen, and their accounts seem very plausible. The lack of physical evidence, however, does make it difficult for me to rank these encounters any higher than a B tier. But another famous account from it even earlier in World War II happened in the early morning of February 24th, 1942. And a cursory web search will tell you that despite the firing of about 1,400 anti-aircraft rounds into the dark skies above Los Angeles, the city was not under Japanese attack. It was, in fact, visited by an alien spacecraft. The main reason for this belief comes from a photo taken during the morning, which seems to show spotlight focusing on a craft that was completely unidentifiable. So what was it? Was it really a UFO off the coast of Southern California? Did World War II soldiers really almost start an intergalactic war? Well, in my opinion, no, probably not. The photo in question was later found to be heavily doctored and retouched prior to publication, which is the main reason for why it looks so unexplainable. The whole ordeal was more than likely a false alarm raised by jittery air defense following Pearl Harbor and the bombing of Elwood near Santa Barbara. As believers, sometimes it's okay to question things like this. this. They'll hit you with false claims, faked pictures, and false evidence to distract you away from the real and truly unexplainable. This goes in the F tier, but shouldn't sway your conviction, because now we have the most famous piece of UFO lore out there. The whole offense is confusing and convoluted, and history has muddled things to the extreme, but I will do my best to describe exactly what happened. In 1947, the US Army had come out and released information about a top-secret spy balloon project that had crashed to the ground around a town in New Mexico. The so-called balloon had been discovered on a ranch in the town of Roswell. Rancher Mac Brazel, who discovered the object on his land, was startled by its discovery and brought it to the local police station, and in turn they brought it to the attention of the local Roswell Army airfield. What happened next will live in infamy forever. Now, you remember how I said they had recovered a balloon? Well, that wasn't what had originally happened. Sometimes as believers, we need to question these things. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. This was the original official statement put out by the US Army, and they had later redacted it within a day. It was too late though. Even with their later statement of the object being an international spy balloon, the story spread to international headlines and spawned hundreds, if not thousands, of theories around what really happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. So what should we really believe, fellow believers? Was this a crashed alien craft? Did they really recover alien bodies? Did they cover up the whole thing and take it to a top secret military installation out in the desert? Or was it just a balloon? To this day, I personally am convinced it was covered up and gets even more believable thanks to other encounters later in this list. I'm putting this in B tier, and honestly we'll leave it up to you to come up with your own conclusions on what really happened in Roswell in 1947. Now, after hearing about what happened in Roswell, if you weren't already a believer, I think you will be after hearing about one of the most intriguing and mysterious sightings on this list. On the evening of August 25th, 1951 in Lubbock, Texas, 3 professors at Texas Tech University were sitting in their backyard drinking tea. If a group had been handpicked to observe a UFO, we couldn't have picked a more technically qualified group of people, wrote US Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt. The group included multiple engineers and scientists, which made the story of what they witnessed that night all the more curious. So what did they see? Around 9:20 p.m. they saw a V-shaped formation of 15 to 30 otherworldly bluish-green lights pass over the Texas night sky. They were stunned and waited for the lights to reappear to get a better look, and lo and behold, they did, but an hour later in a more loose formation. They had all agreed that this was an incredible sighting, but again, what was it? The professors weren't the only credible witness of the lights that night. At dusk in Albuquerque, New Mexico, around 350 or more miles away from Lubbock, an employee of the Atomic Energy Commission's top secret Sandy Corporation and his wife were sitting outside and witnessed a huge aircraft fly silently overhead. On the edges of the wings were 6 to 8 pairs of soft bluish green lights. The wife, about an hour later, saw the craft again fly back over the house, making absolutely zero sound. She said it looked like an airplane without a body. This account in itself is baffling and adds more proof to the professor's claim, but the story doesn't end there. Unlike some of the other accounts from this list, there was one more crucial piece to the story: actual physical evidence. UFO sightings are typically one-off events, but not in this case. And on August 31st, the same night an Air Force wife and her daughter claimed to have seen a UFO, Carl Hart Jr., a Texas Tech freshman, had snapped 2 photos of the lights. These photos were hotly contested and sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to be investigated. They were not a hoax. The photos were certified as real and remain certified to this day. To this day, the Lubbock lights, which they were termed, remain a real mystery. The US Air Force did have a craft that resembled the craft spotted, but was not silent in the least. Other explanations ranging from reflections off birds to swamp gases to optical illusions. But in my opinion, none of these can fully explain the lights or the craft spotted. The physical evidence, the large number of sightings over time, and the character of the witnesses of the sightings make this an S-tier encounter. And still to this day, one of the most plausible sightings of UFOs in history. Group events like this are more believable. In my opinion, the next one has something even more credible along with a group event: the disappearance of a real airplane. But what does this have to do with UFOs? On a stormy early morning in November 1953, there was a report of an unidentified flying object being tracked on radar in the area of Lake Superior near the Sioux Locks region. Air traffic was having a hard time tracking the object, so they scrambled a jet to intercept it. Felix Moncla and Robert Wilson were the pilots of the flight that night, and everything seemed to be normal up until that point. That is, until they reached their destination. According to air traffic control, the 2 dots which indicated the F-89C aircraft and the unknown object seemed to merge. That's where the story takes an even more drastic turn. The dot of the unknown object continued on its path while the 2 pilots' dot had completely vanished. Stunned, the air traffic technician had figured it was an error, or maybe Felix was flying above or below or close enough to the object to not register. They attempted to radio Moncla and Wilson multiple times, but were only left with static on the other side. Search and rescue were quickly dispatched from both the US and Canadian forces, but due to the weather conditions, no trace of Moncla and Wilson or their plane were found that night. And the search continued, but no trace of the airmen or the plane were ever officially discovered. So what happened? Did Moncla crash? Did he succumb to natural causes? Or maybe, just maybe, the blip that kept going had something to do with it. Now, Moncla was known to have vertigo and had bouts of it from time to time, but if he had succumbed to it, why had Wilson not radioed himself? There was a proposed explanation for the other blip as well. The official report states the unknown aircraft was believed to be a Royal Canadian Air Force aircraft that was 30 or more miles off its course, but the Canadian military has refuted that claim, and the pilot who was flying that plane has sworn to this day he had remained strictly on course. The official explanation is still a mystery to this day, and this case goes firmly in the A tier. I think this whole case deserves a deeper dive, as the mystery behind it is more nuanced than I can fully explain here. Would you like to see a longer video about this disappearance? Let me know in the comments down below. From a wild disappearance of an airplane, now that last encounter may leave you a little bit on edge, may leave you wondering, but we now move on to an encounter with not only physical evidence, but also a lawsuit. On the evening of December 29, 1980, 3 Texans would observe something that changed their lives forever. Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's grandson Colby were driving home to Dayton, Texas after an evening of bingo and dining. While driving on a deeply isolated forest road, they saw a light above the trees, but kept going, thinking it was just a plane landing at the local Houston airport. A few minutes later, they saw the light again, and their initial thoughts had been horribly wrong. Directly in front of them, they later stated, was a diamond-shaped craft with a flat top and bottom, and fire coming out of the bottom. The fire was so intense it even made the metal on the vehicle hot to the touch. They screeched the car to a halt, with all 3 getting out to investigate. Colby was terrified and went back in, with Vicki returning closely behind to comfort the boy. Betty Cash stayed out longer though, and got closer to investigate. It was intensely bright and a dull metallic silver, was shaped like a huge upright diamond and about the size of a water tower. Its top and bottom looked cut off so that they were flat rather than pointed. Small blue lights ringed the center, and periodically over the next few minutes, flames shot out of the bottom. The object would float up and down depending on the flames, she stated. The object rose into the sky, and then a group of United States Air Force helicopters, including multiple Chinook, which they later counted to be around 23, approached the object. The object then tilted on its side and slowly departed to the south. The craft now gone, Betty started their car and drove off into the night. On their way home, they could still see the craft in helicopters, and the helicopters seemed to be trying to help the object, or even hem it in. This was an incredible sighting, but wasn't the last piece of the story by far. The next day, all 3 had complained of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and general weakness. Betty, who had stayed out of the car the longest, had the worst symptoms by far, which included painful blisters that formed on her skin and covered most of her body. She would be taken to the hospital and her symptoms worsened severely, but she did end up getting better. She returned home 12 days later, only for her condition to once again worsen, and she had to return to the hospital. All 3 members of the incident would later go on to be diagnosed with radiation exposure. Vicki would develop severe cataracts, and Betty would later sadly come down with breast cancer. After all this, they contacted the Air Force to complain and were told to hire a lawyer and sue the government. They went forward with the lawsuit, but due to lack of evidence and the government stating they did not have a craft like the one they had described, the judge threw the case out. The women continued for years to pursue the government to try to reclaim some of the financial losses they had from their medical bills. And even other witnesses came forward stating they had seen helicopters in the area at the time. Both women were deemed to be incredibly credible witnesses in the case. But to this day, it's still unclear what the women saw out there on that dark Texas road. But what is clear is their injuries were real, and their credibility was too. Betty sadly passed away from her breast cancer in 1998, but continued to swear on her account up until the day she died. I personally believe the women, but this is a case where you will have to be the judge. I'm putting it in the C tier for now, but a higher rating depends on your interpretation. Now, the main observation so far that you may have taken from these encounters is the fact that all of these UFOs have been seen in public areas. But what about military bases? Well, in the early hours of December 26, 1980, a security patrol near the east gate of RAF Woodbridge, led by Colonel Charles Hall, saw lights descending into the nearby Rendlesham Forest. The servicemen, initially thinking it was a downed aircraft, went to investigate. What they encountered in those woods will go down as one of the most incredible sightings in history and live on as what is called the Roswell of the UK. Upon entering the forest, they witnessed a glowing object that was metallic in appearance with colored lights all over it hovering above the ground. As they attempted to approach the craft, it appeared to move through the trees, and as it did, animals on a nearby farm went into a frenzy. It silently moved through the woods, suddenly emitting a laser-like beam that landed 15 feet directly in front of the men. Then the beam's source quickly left, flying north toward the base, says Hall, who audio taped the incident at the time. We could hear chatter on the radios that the beams went down into the weapons storage area. On that exact same night, another report at a major military facility, Royal Air Force Base Bentwaters, had a similar encounter. Ivan Barker, a U.S. Air Force air traffic controller working that night, an exceptionally well-trained man, said he saw something on radar he's never seen before. This object, he says, shocked him and his two colleagues that night with its remarkable speed and maneuverability. On radar, it covered 120 miles in a matter of seconds, he said. It had to be moving Mach 5, 6, 7, or 8, and faster than anything other than possibly a missile. As he looked up from the radar to view it directly, the craft moved into close range, slowed, and then stopped over the base's water tower. Like a helicopter hovering, except with a helicopter you get movement up and down. This was stationary. It was between about 1,500 and 2,000 feet high. The thing was at least a city block in diameter. It was shaped like a giant basketball with portholes around the center from which lights were emitting outward. I was shocked. There was nothing aerodynamic about it. Basketballs don't fly, he said. It stopped over the water tower for only a few seconds before reversing course and speeding back the way it came. The men at Rendlesham Forest returned later that morning to do more investigation into what they had seen. They found 3 small impressions in the ground, as well as burn marks and broken branches on nearby trees. They had taken some readings of the soil and found higher than normal levels of radiation. So what did the men see? To this day, the UK sightings remain a mystery. In my opinion, these are some of the most peculiar and incredible reports in history. The character of the witnesses, along with the tangible physical evidence, including reports and audio recordings, make me believe this is truly an S-tier encounter. Radiation sickness, red, orange, blue, or green lights, these are all starting to tie together. Now, another military engagement happened in September 1976 over Tehran, Iran, and this time the parties involved actually locked onto the object. In the early hours of September 19th, a shining object was reported in the sky above the city by multiple civilians. An Iranian F-4 Phantom was scrambled to investigate the object. Once they reached it, the pilots reported losing instruments and communications, and the dials and screens went crazy. The pilot was forced to return to base, but as soon as it got far enough away from the object, the instrument returned. So a second F-4 Phantom was scrambled and actually acquired a radar lock on the object this time, which meant it had to be made of solid matter. The plane followed the object, which was now strobing the colors blue, green, red, and orange so fast it looked as if they were solid. The UFO plane continued until the object suddenly stopped in midair and sat there unmoving. This is where the story truly gets insane. The plane evaded the object and turned back around slower this time. The craft then dropped a bright object out of its hull, shooting straight at the plane. The pilot locked onto the new object with his missile system, but he later lost all communication with the weapons console. He had to take evasive maneuvers from the object in order to miss it, and then looking back, he saw the object, which had been jettisoned, return to the ship which had originally fired it. UFO then sent another bright object directly down towards the ground that lit up an area of around 3 kilometers. The UFO, now seemingly done with its business here on Earth, accelerated and shot out of the atmosphere. The pilot then tried to land to investigate, but experienced communication and navigational failures and returned to base. A commercial airline also in the area experienced similar malfunctions. So what happened to the object on the ground? The Iranian military sent out ground troops to investigate the area the object was reported to have landed, and although they experienced similar malfunctions to their equipment, they found no trace of the object, and to this day have found nothing, as far as we know. This case is truly incredible and involves many different moving parts and a real lock from a radar and missile systems. There have been multiple attempts at explanations, but none are good enough, in my opinion, to keep the Iranian encounter out of S tier. There was another encounter in 2004 by Iran, which is even more incredible, but that will have to wait for another video. All of this evidence is starting to add up. The lights, the radiation, the disturbances. This whole video has led to the final incident, in my opinion, the most compelling case for the existence of UFOs ever. These comprise of multiple incidents that occurred over the course of years off the coast of the continental United States by highly trained military individuals and include multiple videos depicting completely unexplainable craft moving at incredible speeds and doing incredible maneuvers. These are the Pentagon UFO videos. In 2004, off the coast of Southern California, the USS Nimitz carrier group gave an unusual order to 2 F-18 Hornets. The pilots already airborne were told to stop training and proceed to coordinates with a real-world task. The pilots, weirdly, were also asked if they were carrying live weapons, which they were not. One of the ships in the carrier group had been picking up mysterious objects for several days and had deemed them to be UFOs. The objects had been seen over 100 times over a course of a week and were flying around 80,000 feet, but were observed to drop down to 20,000 feet or lower. That's where our pilots come back in. When they first arrived to the scene, they didn't see any objects, but did observe a disturbance in the ocean with white waves breaking over what looked like a larger object under the surface. The pilots then noticed another one of the objects flying 50 feet above the water. David Fravor, the commander of the elite Black Aces program with more than 16 years of experience, described the object as around 40 feet long and in the shape of a tic-tac. He said the object had swift and erratic movements unlike anything he had ever seen before. All of a sudden, the object turns, rapidly accelerates beyond anything he had seen, crosses the plane's nose, and it's gone. The Nimitz then launched more planes, and one of them captured a video using a highly sensitive camera which can be seen here. Since that encounter, even more sightings have been caught on video by US pilots. These videos are incredible and use advanced video systems to capture. These sightings can go in no other spot but S tier. They come from incredible sources, along with incredible video evidence, which cannot be matched. The UFO phenomenon never seems to end, and now multiple superpowers, including the US, UK, and China, have come out and confirmed the existence to the world. So are you a believer? What do you think these things in our skies are? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a sub and check out some of my other tier lists here and here.